Those numbers are pretty consistent with what we're finding in terms of people's relative fear of the virus, not juxtaposed to, but in addition to, and we asked them as two separate questions, they're concerned about their financial impact that this situation is having on them. At this moment, we see a slightly higher percentage of Americans saying they're concerned about the virus than say they're really concerned about their financial situation. But the freedoms aspect is really important. And I think the most direct and recent comparison really is the Patriot Act and what happened after 9/11, when that was a really big question that not only legal scholars, but communities all over this country were grappling with. I think one of the fascinating things to me, just personally watching this unfold, I'm somebody who, I lead a team that polls America nonstop, but we also are a global organization. I spend most of my time looking at global data. And one of the really important things I think that we'll need to keep tracking are how these technologies are being used now with the justification of public health concerns, whereas in a lot of less free societies, they've been used primarily for social control and for the benefit of the government. So I think that's going to be one of the really important crossovers in the post-COVID era between civil rights and public health. Hopefully those concerns will be alleviated when there is a vaccine and people are able to kind of move more freely. But in the short term, I think every major democracy is going to be grappling with the fact of how do you find a balance between having people tracked on their cell phones in order to control the virus, and who turns that off?
I think on one hand, I think that the lockdown orders were necessary and probably still are necessary. I understand people's frustrations. I understand why people don't feel like there's a lot of accountability or a lot of explanations, especially in states where the outbreaks haven't been as bad as they have been where I am right now, which is New York, which is Queens, which is the epicenter of the epicenter. There isn't a lot of protesting going on right now because a few blocks from here, there are refrigerated trucks filled with bodies. We understand how bad it is. I think that if you really truly feel like you need to violate your state's stay-at-home orders and you need to go protest, maybe put on a mask. Maybe show how responsible you are, how serious you are taking the threat, but you also have concerns about due process and threats to civil liberties. What I think is a greater concern is how in times of crisis, which is what I wrote about for Business Insider, in times of crisis, the government comes and takes civil liberties or abridges civil liberties or places temporary restrictions on civil liberties, and quite often those restrictions are never made untemporary. The government is very unlikely to end a national emergency. They're very unlikely to say that these emergency powers are no longer needed. And I think that's a problem. I think especially if we get to the point where we probably will, where we have contact tracing, where the government will have a database of when we were running a fever or what kind of antibodies we had tested positive for. I think that information should be safeguarded. It should be encrypted. It should be, there should be a sunsetting onto how long the government can hold onto that information. There should be independent watchdogs, somebody that has somebody that has some skin in the game, that is not having a profit interest like Google does, or a power interest like the government does. Somebody needs to be watching to make sure that this information is not abused, that it's protected, and that eventually it goes away.
One of the other fascinating things about this moment is a lot of the traditional political hats are being switched. So now we're looking at a Republican president who is taking the position that the federal government should really be telling the states when to open up, which traditionally, that's something that you would expect from a president who's left of center, whereas federalism has been really a bedrock of Republican and conservative thought and legal theory in this country. These situations tend to switch those rather quickly. There's a very similar, again, situation after the Patriot Act, where very conservative lawmakers who built their careers on sort of a suspicion of an intrusive government, primarily a federal government, into private citizens' lives, were in some cases the champions of the need to now accept these closer, more pervasive restrictions. But I think it's something that's going to be with us for years to come now.